Unknown Thought is made possible through the generosity of sponsors who care about people. IC Savings Bank, Ready Honda, and Corey's Clothiers. I'm so pleased that you have joined us here today for another episode of Unknown Thought, brought to you by our sponsors, IC Savings Bank, Ready Honda, and Corey's Clothiers. My guest today is Monica Parker, and I'm delighted that you're joining me. Monica, I have an important conversation I'd like to have with you. You wrote one of my favorite movies, All Dogs Go to Heaven.
Mm-hmm.
That movie actually still makes me uncomfortable.
Wow.
There's a certain pathos to that film, a certain sadness, a certain desperation. And I'll just share with you on a personal level, the scariest image I recall from my childhood was seeing the game of poker being played by dogs.
I'm sorry.
I know. Thanks for laughing at me. For me.
Okay.
I was scared of that because the anthropomorphic nature of dogs, and growing up in a world where we were scared of dogs, and dogs represented fear and anxiety. And then I saw All Dogs Go to Heaven, and the anthropomorphism that you put into it comes to the screen in full vivid color, and dogs of all shapes and colors have different personalities. And when a dog has a personality and they're almost human-like, it reminded me of that stress of dogs. I've since gone on to fall very much in love with dogs and happy. But All Dogs Go to Heaven has a certain, in my opinion, a certain personal conversation that you're having there. And I'd like you to share it with me and tell me a little bit about your experience that brought that film to life.
It's such an interesting, it's a long story, but I'll try and condense it. It was really Don Bluth, who is a master animator, and he had come, at that time I wrote that movie with a partner whose name is Guy Schulman, and he had come to us and asked us to come up with a story that involved, he wanted to do a Damon Runyon kind of tale. And we came up with this story. Both Guy and I love dogs. And I think the idea for kids watching it that dogs too go to heaven made it possible for them to understand death. That was, in a nutshell, that's really what that's about, is some kind of peace with the idea of death. And so if dogs go to heaven, we get to go to heaven, was really the sort of, and the tale, which has villains and has all the sort of pitfalls of life. It really does. It's got everything.
I actually saw the film, if I can be so bold, through your eyes as your way of dealing with historical truths in your life, where you chose not to do the Fievel Goes West or the Mouse kind of stories, but you chose to look into your history, your family's history with the Holocaust, and sort of in a more genteel fashion perhaps deal with death and pain and struggle. And I don't know if you feel that way, but I sort of see an undercurrent of a challenge to the idea that there's a purposelessness to death, and in a certain sense you've tried to bring comfort to people through it.
I don't know that it's conscious. I think the sum of our parts are our experiences. So I'm not sure that you're always playing to your subconscious. I think your subconscious, especially when you're writing, is something that's alive. I don't like to question, so lofty, I don't like to question creativity, honestly. I think there's some really genuine, pure thing when you're in the zone of creating. I'm sure it's true if you're a painter, to be a writer. There's something else at work, because sometimes when I read things I've written much, much later, I go, who wrote that? And then I wrote that? Because I have no consciousness, and I love that kind of writing. I think it's something at work that should be at work.
Your family had a form of redemption, so to speak, in which your mother comes to Scotland after terrible, tragic moments, and there's a form of redemption that happens, but it's an awkward redemption. She marries a man who she sort of has to marry. Do you want to share it with me?
Well, My mother was a bridge player, and a good one. And she played with diplomats, and she played with movers and shakers. And she was in Vienna, and she had 2 teenage children with her first husband, who wasn't right for her. Nor was the next one, my father. But that's a longer story. Anyway, my mother was told it's time to go, it's time to go. So she got a visa. One of the people she played bridge with, an ambassador, offered her a visa to Ecuador. Another offered her one to Scotland. Scotland was closer, so she said, great. She didn't realize she was only getting 1 visa. So she took my half-brother and sister, really, to an uncle and aunts in Belgium, where she left them. She believed that they would be safe, while she set up a new home in Glasgow, where my mother had to work as a maid. My mother had been a couturier, but she took a job as a maid. And what she didn't know was, well, first of all, war escalated, borders were sealed. My brother was taken by the Nazis to Auschwitz, where he was for 3 or 4 years. He's a survivor. My sister is a survivor in a whole other way. She survived by the grace of kind people and by guts. And at the end of the war, my mother managed to knew she had to get her children in, and so she knew she had to find a husband to bring them in. So she chose my father, a mild-mannered Englishman who didn't know what hit him. And I like to say my mother married him so she could bring her real children into Scotland. She had no idea that she was going to get pregnant and have me. I mean, how do I put this delicately? She said she was going to throw herself down a flight of stairs when she found out she was pregnant, but she knew that she'd break her legs and that I would live. And she said that with love, and I mean that. My mother's sense of humor was
that was delicate.
Odd.
Yeah.
So, love child.
Yeah. Nice. So, I go back to my original premise. It does affect you. It definitely does. A certain dislocation, a certain loss of identity, a certain historical blankness, all these things come into play. And I know that you have a lot of fans. I know people love watching your work. I know that you bring yourself to the work. And I'm glad you're willing to share the deeper, darker history, because it actually does create that sense of intimacy as well. And people, when they meet you, feel that connection. I'm very intrigued by what it's like to be a young Jewess in Scotland at that time.
Well, like lots of people who survived the Holocaust or connected to the Holocaust, they either go one way or the other. Glasgow has a very tight, very intense Jewish community. My mother wanted no part of it. My mother went the other way. She decided, and she came from a very religious background, but she basically opted out. And I wouldn't say she opted out of being Jewish. She opted out of practicing being Jewish. And I was raised literally with no religion, except for the fact that my sister married a Jewish doctor and moved to Canada, whereupon we moved to Canada because my mother had missed my sister for so long. And my sister's influence, my sister's 21 years older than me, her influence on my life was so huge that all my Jewishness comes from her and her husband and their raising of their children. That was the Pesach table. That was the life that I got any Jewishness from. I certainly didn't get it from my mother. So I say I'm Jewish.
Jewish.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Now, Monica, you talk about wanting to write a cookbook called Duck and Cover.
Yes.
I think it's brilliant. Do you think that Duck and Cover is in some ways where you started and now you're just happily uncovered?
Well, that's okay. The genesis for Duck and Cover is obviously the crazy world we live in, where we're always afraid of everything. If it harkens back to my origins, all bad, wherever you're born is your life. And people who are born in much more dire circumstances than me, it's the life they know. My life, I'm grateful for every bit of it because I have a sense of humor. My sense of humor was my survival. And I don't even think I had a bad life. I actually think I had my mother was a loving woman, strong. My father was odd, but I always felt loved. And my odd parents gave me perspective, and my perspective came out as humor. So as we say, what's to complain?
Thank you, Monica.
It's fine.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.